Hello, and welcome to today's Live from New Amsterdam, a joint production of the New Netherland Institute in Albany, New York, and the New Amsterdam Project at New York Historical Society. My guest today is Russell Shorto, a guest who really needs no introduction, but nonetheless, I will give one. He is the director of the New Amsterdam Project at New York Historical Society and the author of many books, wonderful books, including most relevant for today's discussion, Island at the Center of the World. He's also the curator of an installation at New York Historical Society that we're here to talk about today, which is New York Before New York, the Castello Plan of New Amsterdam. So how are you today, Russell?
I'm fine, Deborah. How are you?
Good. So first of all, what is the Castello Plan, and how did you first encounter it? And AV, if we could have the image of the Castello Plan up for a couple of minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks. There it is. It's also, if you want to, this is not the original, but it's a copy behind me. The Castello Plan is a bird's eye map of New Amsterdam, more or less at its height. It was made in about 1660, just 4 years before the English took over and renamed the place New York. And we, as many people who are on this Zoom are aware, we are in the 400th anniversary season, the 400th anniversary of New Netherland, New Amsterdam. A while ago, I would say this is like a good 2 years ago, our colleague Dennis Micah and I were talking about a potential exhibit. And Dennis is, I think, the only person I know who has seen the Castello Plan, the actual one, in its home, which is the Biblioteca Medicea Lorenziana in Florence. And it's, I think you have to go through a number of hoops to be able to see it. It's a work on paper, so it's not on view often because they're very sensitive to light. And Dennis was saying, wouldn't it be great to get the actual Castello Plan? So we were trying some different options, possibilities, trying to talk to different people in Florence. And it happened that I was in Amsterdam and I was having a conversation with Tracy Metz, who's the director of the John Adams Institute there. And I was telling her this, and she said, well, isn't that funny? Tomorrow I'm on a panel with the mayor of Florence. And I said, oh, well, if you wouldn't mind, mentioning this. So the mayor, before long, the mayor's assistant for foreign affairs got in touch with me, and Bob's your uncle. We had it, we got it on loan. So it's wonderful to have, for some people, old objects matter, the original thing. So this is the early view of this city that became New York at its height, which is, to see it in person. Please come to New York Historical. It's up, the exhibit is up until July 14th. If you haven't already seen it, it's wonderful to see the actual thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to just underline your point, it's sometimes it's a bit surprising when you see it because it's actually rather small, and yet there's so much individual detail on it, when you're looking at it. And if you kind of zoom in on different parts, you can see even in this kind of image that we have on screen, like, the individual houses, and you see kind of the fort obviously jumps out, but there's lots of just small details of gardens and stuff in there. So it's just really amazing to see it in person, despite its small size, how much is crammed in there.
Yeah, and just to orient people, it's oriented with south to the left. So the southern tip of Manhattan Island. Normally we think of Manhattan Island as turned the other way. And to the right there, that is the wall at what became Wall Street. And the widest street running across the top is the Herenweg in New Amsterdam, which became Broadway. Yeah, I think that what's remarkable about it too is that it was part of, so in 1653, through much effort, New Amsterdam won a municipal charter. So it was actually chartered. So, you think of, okay, what are Dutch cities? Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague. And then there's this other one starting in 1653 on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean at the tip of Manhattan Island called New Amsterdam. So it became an official Dutch city. It was allowed then to have a city government. And the city government then decided that they would conduct a census, and they would have a surveyor named Jacques Cordeljauw produce a survey. And so putting that, so just to finish that story, Cordeljauw's survey was sent to Amsterdam, and there a cartographer named Johannes Wingbones created this watercolor image based on the survey. Now that original survey is gone, but this is, I guess, a prettier version of it. So this, together with the census information, gives us this wealth of information, because as you say, there are all these individual homes, more than 300. And because of the survey, we can say who owned everyone, who they had bought it from, who was living in it often. And there's just so much that can be unpacked.
Yeah, no, if you look at Ian Stokes' iconography, I think he unpacks it very well there, the individual, putting the names to the individual homes. So that's always an invaluable resource for anyone who's researching New Amsterdam.
Exactly.
So one of the tasks you set for yourself as you kind of were thinking about this exhibition was how to show the people on the margin, perhaps, of the map. And obviously this plan was made by, European, mostly for European viewers. So how did you kind of approach how you were going to fill in those edges that maybe aren't as visible, or perhaps they are somewhat visible in the map?
Yeah, I think so. We use the map as kind of a centerpiece because it's a way you can, here's the city, but we wanted to unpack that. And maybe if this were 30 years ago, we would have been content to tell the European story. But in this day and age, it seems necessary to tell the wider story. So there's really three in my way of looking at it. There's a European story. They came and I say European because it was under Dutch auspices, but there were many different Europeans. There were French speakers, there were Scandinavians. So there's European story. Obviously, there's a native story, which we can get into. The native people, this was their territory, not just Manhattan Island, but the wider area. And it very quickly became an African story because only about a year after New Amsterdam was founded, the first enslaved Africans arrived, and more arrived in the ensuing decades, small numbers, until, strangely, it was just 2 weeks before the English ships came to take over the colony that the largest shipment of enslaved Africans, 290 men, women, and children, arrived. So they were probably wandering around in the city, some of them anyway, at the time of the takeover. So those stories are all intertwined. And the challenge, not just for me, not just for the New York Historical Society, but for museums everywhere that are trying to give voices to all aspects of the past, of societies of the past, is that we have what fills our museums is sort of the attics of the wealthy people, of the elite. Their silver collections, their spoons, and all that. And very little from, in this case, the Africans and the native people of the region. So that was the challenge. And well, we can talk about some individual items and how we went about doing that, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any ones that I have some that I want to talk about, but if you have any you want to talk about specifically?
Well, several years ago, actually, Dennis, Micah, and I were at the New York State Museum, and Mike Lucas, the state archaeologist, was giving us kind of a behind-the-scenes tour of their holdings. I think you've gotten that tour as well, and showing, the wealth of what the State Museum has in its collection, specifically related to New Netherland and New Amsterdam. And he had in a drawer, and I don't think it's ever been on view anywhere before, a collection of objects, which the State Museum was calling an inkisi. And I've since learned that it's actually called an mpungu. It was found buried out in an alley outside the home of Cornelis van Tienhoven, who was Peter Stuyvesant's henchman, right-hand man. And it
We
was
could have a whole discussion just about Cornelis van Tienhoven.
sure, and how he disappeared, and yeah. So it was below the ground level was a basket. The basket had a Dutch plate on the top, and in this basket were dozens of objects: marbles, pipe stems, animal bones, and a professor of art history at Oxford named Barbaro Martinez Ruiz is the one who gave me this real insight into what this seems to be. And he told me that it is properly called an mpungu, which is, I think the word means collection. So it's in Central African belief, and it's kind of an overlap between religious belief and medicine. You would bring in order to bring about some kind of healing, maybe for an individual or for a community, you would a person who has experience in these things would bring together a collection of objects, and they would all be objects that have been used, handled by people. And in this belief system, every object has a kind of energy that it emanates. And so this person who, with this kind of knowledge, brings together certain objects with a particular intent in mind, a particular kind of healing focus in mind. And then what you would do with it is, he said, typically it was on a weekly basis you would interact with it. So you'd take the lid off, and he would fill his mouth with alcohol, like with brandy or something, and spray it over them. And that would help to, get these things, these forces in motion. So here we had right outside the home of, one of the main figures of European control in New Amsterdam, we've got this evidence of African culture. And it may be the case that most of the enslaved Africans in New Amsterdam, they came from a part of Africa that had been colonized by the Portuguese, and there's some evidence, including in their names, that they were already Catholic when they were enslaved. So they came with Catholic beliefs, but this is evidence that they also combined that with other African traditions, which is a very exciting and I think a very rare thing to have.
Just to mention that if you want to see this object that we're talking about, if you Google the Castello Plan installation at New York Historical Society, it is one of the featured objects. So you should be able to see this for yourself if you want to right now.
But you should see the real thing.
Yeah, yes, and you should also see the real thing. But if you're wondering what we're talking about, you do also have the option to quickly look at it online.
And Deborah, I'll just add that we have the items there, and Sophia Lynn, the designer, created this really elegant design to give you a sense of how they would have looked layered, but also the basket they were in, it was like a woven basket, which was buried in the ground, and the archaeologists couldn't remove it without just destroying it. So they created a rubber cast of it, which we have in the display as well.
Yes, it's one of the most interesting items to display that I've seen in a long time, because there's so many additional items. So there's a big basket and then all these additional items.
Yeah.
I think some people are maybe asking for the spelling of mpungu, so I'm just going to give it to everyone. It's MPUNGU. So again, you'll find all that information on the website for the installation. Yeah, so it's such an interesting story, because it also implies that there's someone kind of a high level within this culture who can make this mpungu, and activate it in a way. So one has to wonder which of the people that we know about in the documents this is. There's obviously no answer, but it's exciting to think about.
And I think for people like me, probably like you and me, Deborah, we tend to be focused on documents and what information is in documents. So a great thing about I've never curated a museum exhibit before. And a great thing about being involved in this was that you are interacting with objects, and slowly that's helping you to envision other aspects of what life was like in the place that are not, I mean, it's not mentioned in any document, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't lose sight of the physical environment. And Mike Lucas, the state archaeologist, gives a wonderful tour of the items that have been collected over the years by the state in different archaeological digs. And it is worth mentioning that something that's very interesting about this is to see these items from New Amsterdam, other than the ones that are at the New York Historical Society on loan right now. You actually have to go to Albany. So you get New Amsterdam's history by going upstate is something very interesting. Do you want to say anything about some of the ways you added some indigenous people to this
Sure.
exhibit?
Yeah, well, the main thing that we've got, which certainly relates to the Munsee or Lenape people, is the so-called Peter Schagen letter, which is another of these, you can't believe you're looking at it. And it is in the collection of the National Archives in The Hague. The Dutch they're colonizers in the 17th century. And so they go in, starting in 1623, 1624, they begin to send settlers. And early on, they decide that they will negotiate land deals, because that's the way they see things. And we assume, it's only an assumption, that they negotiated a deed of some sort with presumably the Lenape or Munsee people of the region. I say presume them because they were the wider New York City area, west into New Jersey, somewhat to the north and south to Delaware, was Munsee territory. So it was probably Lenape or Munsee tribe. And in 1626, there would have been some sort of negotiation. We don't know exactly what, but the Dutch engaged in something like 600 deeds, land deals with Native people over the course of the 40-odd years of their presence. And we have the deed for Staten Island. We have a lot of these deeds. We don't have the deed for Manhattan Island. But whatever this negotiation was, after it, the next ship that left Manhattan went to the home country, and there was a Dutch official there named Peter Schagen, who did what I guess they always did. You make a report on this returning vessel. And he said, our people in this new colony are doing well, and some of the women have given birth, and there are crops in the ground. And oh, by the way, our people have purchased the island of Manhattan from the native people for the value of 60 guilders. So this is the infamous phrase that becomes, in the 19th century, it gets translated into $24. And then you get this compacted statement that, oh, these native people sold the island of Manhattan for $24. Isn't that ridiculous? We could spend hours talking about this. The native people certainly didn't have a concept of real estate transaction. You didn't buy and sell land like that. What they surely entered into, if they entered into something, was a land use agreement, which said, we'll allow you to come and live here as well. We're going to stay. We'll do what we want, but we'll allow you to come here as well, and we'll both get things out of it. We'll help each other if we're attacked, and presumably they thought it was worthwhile to have the Dutch nearby, because then they could get manufactured goods from them. So we don't have the deed, but we have this Peter Schagen letter, which, if you think about it, is such a momentous artifact, because all of New York City is built on that. That was the starting point. So once we were able to get that on loan, I then reached out to a number of people in the Lenape community, and I leaned on Beatrice Glow, who is the artist who has a wonderful exhibit at New York Historical right now as well. And she has been working with Lenape and other indigenous people for her exhibit and had all these contacts. So I reached out to a number of people, and a man named Brent Stonefish, who is a member of the Lenape community in Ontario, put together a consortium of 3 Lenape chiefs to craft a statement, their reaction to this momentous document, the Peter Schagen letter, which we have. So we've got the actual physical document, we've got the English translation, and then we've got this, I think, quite moving Lenape statement in which they basically address the unnamed ancestor of theirs who entered into whatever this negotiation was, saying, in effect, did you have any idea how much suffering you would cause our people? So that item with, I think, I wouldn't have wanted to display it without some sort of Lenape reflection on it. But those two things together, I think, make a pretty strong statement about our past.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the highlights, of the exhibition, reading that letter and having that reflection. We're going to get into the Q&A in 1 minute. So if you have questions, we already see there's already some questions, but feel free to add some more questions to that Q&A. I just want to say one last thing about this. I was at yesterday. I was giving a little talk at the Dykeman farmhouse, and there's a rock in Inwood which is identified as the place where Peter Minuit made that initial 1626 land deal. And I just this isn't really a question, more of a comment, but I just think it's interesting how eager everyone on Manhattan Island is to claim to be the site of this sale, and we don't really know where exactly it occurred. But I think most people imagine probably on Lower Manhattan rather than in Inwood.
Yeah, I think that this is my speculation, but I think that plaque placement was early 20th century, and I think they had found near there at that time some remains of a Lenape village. So somebody decided, oh, this must be where it happened. So they stuck a plaque on it. But I think you're right. It would have been probably in Lower Manhattan near where the fort was, which was the beginning of the Wakaskek Trail, the native trail.
Yes. Okay, so I think we're going to get into some questions now. The first question is, do we know how the plan came to Florence? And is there any information as to why Cosimo III de' Medici bought the map, or any, do we know anything more about that?
Yeah, it came to Florence because it was bought by Medici, and it happened. So the map was created around 1660, and shortly thereafter, the Archduke of Tuscany was a collector of city views of cityscapes around the world, and I guess got wind of this, and so bought it to hang in the Villa da Castello, his palace, his castle in Florence, which is why it's called the Castello Plan, and it has basically been in Florence ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, obviously, that Florence was one of the great city-states, and it was probably a little bit of a propping up other cities was probably a little bit part of the political rhetoric of Florence at the time. Question 2 is, I don't know if we'll be able to answer all of these questions, but we'll do our best. From the original survey, who lived where on the plan? What happened to the census, and what happened to the map that was made? Did the cartographer actually go to New Amsterdam? So I think we kind of addressed some of these questions, but let's just make it crystal clear.
Who lived where is, I mean, if you look down at the far left at the bottom, you can make out a White House that's much larger than the others. Peter Stuyvesant, the director of the colony, lived there. He had it built. Although you can see, you can probably make out the red tiled roofs. Those are the houses. Just to point out, sort of cat-a-corner from his, at the end of what is Pearl Street there, sort of near where the dock is, was the home, just to name one, of Sarah Kierstede, who was she was a very gifted linguist, and she spoke several native languages, and she was a main interpreter. And she lived there. And while in the latter days, actually after the creation of the Castello Plan, they decided to create a kind of, I guess, covered open air market where the native people would bring their goods and trade them. And they put it right in front of her house. And it was only while working on this exhibit and working on the virtual Castello Plan, which we have as an accompaniment, which we did together, the New Amsterdam History Center created it, that I, as as much as I've spent years of my life sort of mentally inhabiting the Castello Plan, but it was only in the process of doing that that I realized, oh, that's why they had, there's her house. Of course, they would put this market right in front of her house because she was there to be able to translate.
Yes, and I mean, it's amazing how often something that you're so familiar with becomes new again when you have to relook at it from a
Exactly.
different perspective. Um, Also, it's worth mentioning that you do see a nice view of the canal in New Amsterdam from with the bridges. That's a feature that the Dutch almost always introduced to every colonial city that they inhabit in the 17th century. Another question is, how did the Dutch negotiate the deed without knowing the language? Did they have a translator? So that kind of ties in with your just previous comment about Sarah Kiersteda. And I mean, I think the short
Yeah,
answer is we don't exactly know.
that is the short answer. Nor do we know that there actually was a deed.
Right. Yes, that's a good point. We only know that they reported that there was a deed in the letter, but we don't have the deed.
Yeah.
I'm guessing also we could say that, in 1626, it's the indigenous people on Manhattan had probably seen a few European ships by that point. So I don't know if they would have been 100% surprised by the appearance of these folks. And they certainly knew them as trading partners, which I think goes to your point that they probably thought they were negotiating some kind of land use agreement rather than a actual sale of any land.
Yeah, and I think that the Dutch were aware of the native understanding of land and property, and I think that they were kind of playing two games at once. I think they were saying, okay, this is a land use thing, you can be living here and so on, but then they also wanted to get something on paper with signatures or marks so that they could show another Dutchman or the English or the French or whoever came by, no, look, we have the deed for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think in some ways this is as much directed at, or particularly directed at the English who are already complaining about Dutch settlement as at
Exactly.
anyone else. Okay, the last question is, who owns the map now, and did the map have any other purpose other than illustrating the survey results? That's actually kind of a toughie.
Yeah, well, who owns it is the library, the Biblioteca Lorenziana in Florence, and it is loaned out very infrequently. I think because it's it's something on paper, and you can't. The restrictions as a first-time museum curator. I mean, I say I was the curator. I had this whole team of professionals at New York Historical. Who really know this stuff. But to me, there were all these new things, like they talk in terms of candles, like how many candles, that's a measurement of light, can a particular work be exposed to. So I think it was like 5 candles or something, So when you go to the exhibit, it's rather dim in there because this work, and then we haven't mentioned the Peter Schagen letter and the Vingbones watercolor we also have from the Dutch National Archives is a lovely watercolor view of New Amsterdam, and that is on paper, and these things are very sensitive.
Yes, and we have to always follow those rules so future generations can enjoy these items as well.
Sure.
Do we want to take a little bit of a stab at, did the map have any other purpose other than illustrating the survey results?
Well, the interesting thing is, why was the watercolor of it made? The survey was made to, because the city was trying to get its foundations and get its things in order. But we don't know exactly why this watercolor was made. Was it commissioned by the Duke of Tuscany? I don't think we have any idea why, but it's prettier than it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's something for speculation. And And then just one last question, which is, where can I find the map? Well, right now at New York Historical Society until what day?
July 14th, but
July
online you can
14th.
find excellent reproductions of it and Google them. And some of them have, you can put it together with information to like zoom in on particular houses.
And where can people find more information about 400th anniversary events?
Good question. You and I ought to be able to answer that together.
I think there's a website through Dutch Culture USA, which kind of Dutch Culture USA aggregates the different events that are happening under different auspices, I believe.
And they call it their Future 400. They're looking ahead 400 years. So I think if you Google Future 400 and Dutch Culture USA, they have kind of a aggregate of different things. But we'll have things going on at New York Historical, and I think New York Public Library is doing things, and various.
Yeah, I think the Albany Institute of History and Art will also be having something this year, and we will be doing. There's more 400th anniversaries to come, so this should be next 5 years should be a great slate of activities for people who are interested in learning more. Okay, I think we'll conclude there. So thank you so much, Russell, for being a wonderful guest as always. And join us on June 20th when I will interview the artist Beatrice Glow. We mentioned her already, but she also has an exhibit at New York Historical right now called When Our Rivers Meet, and it's very lovely. I'm looking forward to talking to her. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.